So I just recently arrived in London, so some short introduction I think is in place. I just came to London from Greece. I've been very involved in the local community there, doing the local Node.js meetups, organizing the David conference, which I definitely suggest you check out for a very nice warm trip on June to Thessaloniki in Greece to meet the best web developers and trends out there going on. I'm very active on open source. I have over 40 NPM packages published on NPM, and I've contributed to most major Node.js packages as well. Professionally, my previous roles were mostly managing and growing teams, and that is the type of role I'm looking for here, although I know it's going to take long, so if you got any contracted jobs for me, I'm here to take them. So, we're going to talk about setting up your testing infrastructure, what you need to invest in so that you have a robust test infrastructure for your Node.js application. And this is specifically referred to early stage startups. So, going through this commotion time and time again, years over the years, we have observed certain patterns and practices that work best and accelerate your testing and make it even more robust and rigid. And this is what we're going to talk about today. So if you are a major corporation with 200 plus engineers, some things may apply, some things may not. So today we're going to talk about the tools and the libraries used, and most importantly, how to set up your Node.js application so it's more testable, and how to create your testing infrastructure. That is the point of this presentation. So these are just the tools that I use. I'm just showing them because these are the tools that we are going to be using. Tools differ, but what I want you to keep from today's presentation is the practices and the patterns, which we are going to be checking out right now. So, when you are creating a Node.js application, what you need to be careful of is to initialize everything within functions. So you don't have anything defined outside of functions that would be executed by the moment your module is required. Let's see what this means in code, basically. So this is our index.js file. This is basically your bootstrap file, the very first file that Node.js will load to boot up your application. At the top, we got our libraries that we require. And this right here is the application boot function. We start by booting our services, our database connections, our S3, whatever, our queues. So everything is ready for the application to start. When everything is ready, we then proceed to start our web server or whatever the service is. And after that, at the end of the file, we have two very important parts. We have the standalone test. So this basically is a hack that stores in this Boolean variable whether this module has been run directly from Node or has been required by another module, which would mean that we are actually in test mode. And if we have been launched by the Node process directly, if we are a standalone right now in standalone mode, that is the moment when we start our application and everything starts booting up. This is a very important step so as to have complete control over how our application boots. And it's basically to treat our application as if it was a library that can be required and initialized boot manually, not automatically. So this is your test directory structure. Again, let's not stick to the names. Let's focus on the essence here. We have an asserts folder. We're going to talk about it in extent. E2E, your end-to-end tests, your fixtures, we're going to talk about them too, library, Res, again, we're going to talk about them, and your unit tests. I separate end-to-end to unit tests, and you will see why. They have a different boot path. So what do we do? What do we use the asserts folder for? I found over time, as we are building CRUD applications, create, read, update, delete, that I've been doing the same things over and over again. So I'm sending a request, I'm getting a response, the response object of that particular resource, and I want to test that object for its correctness. I want to assert that the object that I have received, a user object, let's say, has the expected properties with the expected types and the expected values. So basically, that's what I'm checking. I'm checking, are all the properties there? The user object should have 14 properties. Username, email, blah, 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 blah. Are the types of the properties correct? I'm expecting a Boolean here. I'm expecting a number. And finally, are the values themselves correct? So I have a date field. Is the value of the date field actually a date, or is it scrambled? So I've cut it in two parts so I can explain it better, how an assert module looks like. The idea is that you have a run all method that basically takes the item, the object, the user data object, and passes it through the 3 consecutive tests that we talked about, testing the properties, testing the types, and testing the values. Testing the properties is pretty straightforward. Item on itself should be an object. Then we test for the properties. There should be 2 and only 2 properties, and those should be them. That's what we are asserting here. And here we are asserting the types. And finally, the values. The reason we are creating assertion files is because a specific resource, a specific endpoint, the user's endpoint, and I'm talking about all the endpoints of the users, are returning the same user data object for each request we make, all right? Update a user, update their email, create a user, login a user. We are always returning the user data object. Apply that to every resource that you are testing. So instead of checking every time on every test separately, are the properties there? Are the types correct? You have it as a module, and you decouple that type of testing so that you can accelerate testing of your endpoints. Fixtures. So in fixtures, you have the modules that will generate the data required for your tests to run. So I want to create a user. I need a username and a password to create a user. That is what fixtures are for. I've taken a liking on using randomizers so as to not make the fixture methods idempotent. That is, they always return a different result. So for instance, I want to get an account object to create a user. I need a name and a phone number. I'm using faker to generate a random name for me. And the reason I'm doing that is to provoke the system to produce an error. And here somebody would come and say, why wouldn't you do that? You know, brute force all the names. And again, these are techniques for a startup that is starting out on the early stages, on the mid stages, where product screams over your ear, and you only have a very limited time to get it done, and you need to have it tested. And that is the practicality and the reality of what we are facing. We are moving now into the libraries directory. The libraries directory contains the test library.js file. That file is the common library file for every test that we are creating. Every test that we are creating requires this file, and this module's purpose is to prepare the environment for us, which is basically start up the application, make sure everything is up and running, and then pass back control to the test runners. Additionally, in that directory, we are going to create modules that will help us perform certain tasks faster. So after we've tested user creation, on the next test, when we want to test the user login, we will create a module in the libraries folder to automatically create a user for us by just calling a method instead of creating a user on its test. So yeah, I've gone through this. I explained to you what test_lib.js is. So we're moving now to the accounts lib. So account is the user, and basically we want to provide methods to create users, to delete, to alter, whatever operation we are doing repeatedly and required to be done to bring the system in a state where we can test it. We decouple all of that logic inside the library folder so it can be reusable. That's the idea. And here you can see a breakout of such module. We have a create user, which basically performs an XHR call to our API with the account data that we are getting from arguments. And then after the user is created, we return the user data object as it has been returned by our service. To further automation on that, and now we're going into specifics of Mocha. Mocha, like every other test runner, has setup cases which are run before every test, and deconstruction cases which are run after every test. So we can automate that as well, and we can create inline a before reads, which is a special keyword method of Mocha that instructs Mocha to run before every test, basically create the account. And as you can see, the account data is provided through the fixture module, which we saw previously. So we are now starting to tie everything together. We are requiring the fixtures module. We are getting a new user data object to test. We are proceeding to create a user. And then, this is very specific to Mocha. Mocha has a context. Then we store the created account into Mocha's context. That is what this account1 does. And this .account1 is available in all of our tests. So we can say through our testing, this .account1.id, do whatever you want with that ID. That's the idea. So this is a test file. And as you can see in our test file, what happens first is that we call our initializer from the test library. This will ensure, this basically invokes a before reads that will boot up our application in the form that we saw before. And until the application has booted correctly and is ready to get tested, it will not allow anything else to be executed. So basically, this line is everywhere. The other parts that I want you to take note of is that everything is within a single describe. We'll talk about this a little bit later. And as you can see, what's going on here is that I am testing user creation. I've taken extra care so as to not include actual XHR calls within the test. Instead, I have decoupled that logic into my library so I can reuse it. It's all the same. So what if I put the code here? What if I put the code here? Well, if I have it in my library, it is reusable, and I can reuse it to test 100 different scenarios for registering a user. So we want to wrap all our test cases in a single describe. That's regardless of your tester. That is going to provide you a very easy way to run only a specific shoot or skip a specific shoot entirely. And then create a second describe. So you can see here we have 2 describes. To describe the more specific area of testing as you test. Even if that seems redundant, if you only have one test, it's a good practice to follow, as the code base is a living organism, and setting patterns and things right in place is what matters the most, and good coding practices is all about. So we're moving it a little step further now. we want to test specifically for account creation. And this is how, this is basically how we, sorry, create an account again. All right, this is a wrong description. What I want to create, now that I have created an account, I want to create an event. Suppose that events are core to your product. And in order to test event creation, I need a user. And this is where the setup cases come into place here. So again, I'm starting with my initialization, so I ensure that my application has started up before testing. And then right here, account lib setup one. This is the example that I showed you before. That's going to automatically create the account and store the account into the this account one. And then I can use the user ID to create the event data, and so on and so forth. And this can go down the rabbit hole for as many setup cases as you like to bring the testing into to bring your application into the correct state to test. Like I said, never do XHR calls within your tests. As much as you can, try to decouple them into their own libraries for reusability. And beware of contexts if you're working with Mocha. There are certain problems. So again, to summarize, focus on the patterns here and not the specific methods. Focus on the techniques. The idea is that you have a tester library whose responsibility is to boot up your application. And the next idea is that you have decoupled all the business logic that needs to be in place before you can run your tests, so as, again, to bring the service in a state that you can perform your test. Next, run your tests, and then optionally run the outcome on the automated asserters that we discussed about. I think I was very fast. That was it. Thank you.